Home Affairs and Information, it is my honor to welcome you to this evening's panel discussion on weather, climate, and disaster risk reduction. This is the final in a series of discussions hosted by the Barbados Meteorological Services, BMS, in collaboration with the Department of Emergency Management, DEM, as I will refer to them as I go on, which aims to improve the effectiveness of forecasts provided by the BMS. The collaboration with DEM and the district emergency organizations gives insight into the connection between the occurrence of significant weather events and the role of disaster managers. These dialogues form part of the 2023 BMS Outreach Program, an initiative started back in March this year as the BMS opened its doors to students across the island and members of the public to showcase various aspects of its operations. Stemming from this, several meetings were held with stakeholders across the many sectors that form part of our national emergency system. The BMS was able to identify areas to better improve the communication and tailor sector-specific products, while discussing ways to reach the vulnerable members of our society. Throughout each of the discussions, and as you will hear about today, is the concept of impact-based forecasting, which has been adopted by several World Meteorological Organization member countries, including Barbados in 2020. This concept is one consistently introduced by the BMS to educate people on the impacts associated with a hazard, how it will affect your day, and responses as to what you should do. As Barbados forges ahead in its efforts in early warnings for all, it has significantly improved the observational capacity of the department and by extension that of the island. This work continues. It includes increasing the fleet of automatic weather stations across the island to assess the distribution of rainfall and temperature, among other things. Recently, the BMS has gone beyond land observations to marine observations around the island's coastal waters. These unmanned surface vessels, one of which, named the Wilfred, was recently launched on the 23rd of October, will provide valuable information on swell height, sea surface temperature, and wind direction, among many other properties. The last mile of the Early Warnings Initiative is communicating effectively with the public and ensuring that the messaging reaches all members of society. It goes beyond forecasting and observing, but involves listening to customers and the needs of stakeholders. The largest customers are the public of Barbados. The previous panels have featured stakeholders from the tourism industry, insurance, the Coastal Zone Management Unit, agriculture, and health, to name a few, linking the impacts for weather and climate on these various sectors. This final discussion brings together each of the topics previously discussed, focusing on the social impacts of weather, climate, and disaster risk reduction as it relates to our water, light, and power resources and the impacts on our economy. This is your opportunity to engage in dialogue with the BMS, DEM, and the entities here today. It is an opportunity to learn and better understand the weather around us and how it impacts our lives. Become aware of the various platforms to be notified on weather watches and warnings. I urge you to take this opportunity, not just for yourselves, but for your families, your friends, and even within your communities. Share the knowledge that you have gained here. It is an honor as the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information to have the collaboration between Government Information Service, Public Affairs Department, Department of Emergency Management, and Barbados Meteorological Services, all of which fall under the Ministry, in successfully hosting this series. I would like to extend gratitude to the officers involved for all of their contributions and their hard work. Finally, to members of the public for coming out both in person and online, and supporting this initiative. I thank you.
Thank you so much, P.S. Goddard. We begin by introducing our panel to you. I'm going to start off with Mrs. Samelka Jackman, meteorologist with the Barbados Meteorological Services. It was a passion for the weather that drew Mrs. Jackman into the studies of meteorology. After completing her bachelor's, she started her career at the Barbados Meteorological Services as a meteorological assistant, moving through the ranks as a meteorologist, and is now the senior meteorologist. Mrs. Jackman is keen on seeing the continuous development of the Barbados Met Office, ensuring that it is and will remain a leading meteorological service within the Caribbean and Americas. In her role as senior meteorologist, she's in an ideal position to provide critical input to long-term strategic goals of the department. She's also a member of the Rotary and is guided by their motto, service above self. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Samelka Jackman of the Barbados Meteorological Services. You can clap. Next, I'll introduce Mr. Alex Eiffel. Mr. Eiffel holds a master's degree in water pollution control technology from Cranfield University in the United Kingdom and a bachelor's in environmental biology from the University of Greenwich, also in the UK. He holds a diploma in land information and geographic information system and environmental health inspection. He has worked with the Barbados Water Authority for the past 29 years and is presently the manager of water resources and environmental management. This unit, which he heads, has responsibility for the sustainable management and protection of the national water resources of Barbados. He is the BWA's representative on the National Climate Change Committee. Both his work and research interests are interlinked with environmental protection, modeling, and adaptation to climate change. Please welcome Mr. Alex Eiffel. Next panelist is Ms. Ashley Lashley. She is a 24-year-old Barbados UNICEF youth advocate and CARICOM youth ambassador who has a wide focus on social development issues, particularly as it relates to health, the environment, children, and women's rights. She began her journey in 2015 with the establishment of the Schools Against Non-Communicable Diseases when she was just 16 years old. She's also chaired committees on these issues and worked with many non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations in Barbados and across the region. She was crowned Miss Teen Barbados in 2016 and Miss World Barbados in 2018. Since the inception of the Schools Against Non-Communicable Diseases, Ms. Lashley has initiated, together with partners, a series of social intervention initiatives, essentially designed to tackle these issues. In 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, she hosted 3 Global Youth Network Summits in Barbados with a primary focus on non-communicable diseases, sustainable development goals, climate change, and health and sports for climate action. She was named an advocate for childhood obesity by the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados and was honored by the Optimist Club for her work in non-communicable diseases.
Excellent.
She is currently the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Model Patrol, which is a creative development academy whose main objectives are to create and provide the necessary and enabling environment and enhance the capabilities of youth and talented Barbadian and Caribbean creatives drawn from all social corridors, especially in the communities, to reach the international stage. Please welcome Ms. Ashley Lashley. We are having some audio challenges, but we trust that our team will get to the bottom of it for us shortly. Next up is Anton Balgrave. Anton Balgrave is the Director of the Research and Economic Analysis Department at the Central Bank of Barbados. His early career was with the Central Bank, which he joined out of university. He started as a research officer and was subsequently promoted to senior economist after completing his master in economics from the University of Kent. In order to broaden his horizon, he left the central bank to work as an investment analyst, where he gained experience in equity, debt, private equity analysis, and general portfolio management. He's the holder of the Global Association of Risk Professionals Financial Risk Manager certification. Please welcome Mr. Anton Balgrave. Also participating in our panel today is Mr. Roger Beckles. He is a senior engineering manager, distribution technical at the Barbados Light and Power Company Limited. He's assigned to the transmission and distribution section of the operations department. He has over 30 years of engineering experience at the utility level, having spent 23 years in the generation department, performing electrical maintenance and engineering for low-speed diesel units, steam station boilers and turbines and gas turbines and a lot of other stuff that I'm sure he will get into with us today. He has a bachelor's degree in electronic and electrical engineering from Birmingham University and a master's degree in business administration, MBA, from Durham University. His current responsibilities include fleet management, operations technology, substations, maintenance, and metering. He's also happily married for the past 24 years. To his wife, Laura, they have 2 children, Jonathan and Kimberly. Big up to Jonathan and Kimberly, watching Daddy online.
Yes.
And last but certainly not least, we have Captain Robert Harewood. Save the best for last, right, Robert? Captain Harewood is the Substantive Deputy Director of the Barbados Department of Emergency Management. He is a disaster management professional with 20 years in the discipline. He has a bachelor's degree in sociology and psychology from the University of the West Indies, a Master of Science degree in risk, crisis, and disaster management from the University of Leicester, and a Cambridge University Professional Diploma in Project Management. He also has professional training in several areas in disaster management, including FEMA's Community Emergency Response Team training, damage assessment and needs analysis, urban search and rescue, light level, incident command and critical incident management systems, emergency operations center operations. He's also successfully completed courses in earthquake disaster management planning, which he did in Beijing, China, strategic leadership, and managing defense in the wider security context through the Defense Academy, United Kingdom. As you can imagine then, he's a member of the Barbados Regiment Reserve of the Barbados Defense Force, where he has been serving for the past 37 years. He started when he was a baby. He is a recipient of the Barbados Defense Board's Commendation, the Efficiency Medal, Efficiency Decoration, the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal, and the COVID-19 Humanitarian Medal. Save the best for last, Mr. Robert Harewood. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here, as I mentioned before, to discuss weather, climate, and disaster risk reduction, as you would have heard the discussion. Before I start, I want to give a special shout out to all of the team members at the Barbados Meteorological Service who worked extremely hard to pull this entire event together. I want to start our discussion with our colleagues at the Barbados Meteorological Services. Give you the opportunity to open the baton, Samelka. The Barbados Met Service continues to include and engage a number of agencies within its outreach program through these very panels. Can you speak to why this is important, this wide stakeholder engagement? What have been the benefits? And of course, how do these agencies fit into the whole picture of weather, climate, and disaster risk reduction?
Okay. Well, one of the reasons why we want to include all...
I believe you may need to remove your mic.
This work better?
That should be fine, yes.
Okay. So the reason why we include a number of stakeholders from various agencies and sectors in society is because the weather is connected to everything we do. It's connected to how we plan our day, is connected to how we send our children to school, is connected to how the utility companies operate. The weather and climate is connected to everything. It's part of our lives. And when we talk about impact-based forecasting and when we talk about what the weather is going to do so you could better prepare yourself, we need to engage all of these stakeholders so that they could give us input. We can speak at the Met Office, of course, about what the weather will be and start to talk about some of the impacts. But we need professionals and persons with the expertise, like persons on the panel now, to tell us some of the other impacts that would affect each sector in society because of the weather. And that's why we've been engaging those stakeholders continuously. We at the BMS, we don't want to just say, okay, we're doing better, this is better than we did 10 years ago, and that is fine. But we want to say, okay, it's better now, but how do we move to the next level? And we move to the next level by having that engagement. And that is the main reason why we started the outreach this year. and the main reason that we're having all of these engaging conversations. Coming out of these panel discussions, there are some stakeholders which we might not have had any interaction with before. So, for example, the tourism sector, that was one of the sectors that we didn't have a lot of engagement with. Water Authority, Light and Power, DEM, they're very close to the Met Office, and we've worked together very closely. But the tourism sector, that was one that we hadn't worked closely with. We had a panel discussion. We invited BHTA to be on the panel. And coming out of that, we actually started having conversations with them regarding how can we tailor our messages to be more effective for the tourism sector, what they would want, what the members in the BHTA would like to hear from us so they can more effectively plan, which is obviously then very helpful to DEM, and I guess Robert will speak to that, regarding then the response and reducing the risk as it relates to disaster risk reduction.
You mentioned impact-based forecasting just now. Can you give us a little bit more detail on impact-based forecasting and perhaps how it affects or benefits us at the micro or individual level?
Right, so yes, we kind of say it without thinking at the Met Office because it's just ingrained in what we do now. So if you just think back to maybe 5 years ago, what you would have heard as it relates to the weather forecast coming out of the Met Office. You would have heard fair to partly cloudy with a few isolated showers. And that was what we were giving you. And that forecast was very compact, and it meant a whole lot, but it was just one sentence, and a lot of persons didn't understand what that meant. And people would meet me on the streets and they would say, oh, today is fair to partly cloudy, and or upper level trough is affecting us because there's rain. But they don't really know, they wouldn't know what it means, and they find it funny. So with impact-based forecasting, we kind of try to simplify what the impacts of the weather. So we forecast for a number of various hazards, rainfall, wind, thunderstorms, marine, as well as dust haze. And we start to look at each hazard and we start to say, okay, if we have rainfall, for example, if we have a certain amount of rainfall, so you might hear us saying, oh, 50 millimeters or 2 inches of rainfall. Again, your question is, what does that mean? Not just you as the public, but also the stakeholders. You want a better understanding about what 2 inches of rainfall would do for you so that you would know how to react, how to plan, how to mobilize certain things if needed. So we've said, yes, we still give certain figures because that's still relevant to some persons. But then we take it a step further with impact-based forecasting and we say, okay, 2 inches of rainfall, this means that is likely to be flooding in certain areas, especially those flood-prone areas. Because if you get 2 inches of rainfall in a short space of time, that would cause flooding. So our language now, especially with our flood watches and warnings, we will start to say, could expect flooding in flood-prone areas, runoff from higher elevations, delays in traffic. So that starts to make you think, okay, these are the things that might happen if I see 2 inches of rainfall that my office is forecasting. And this is what I would have to do. You can start to mobilize your plans effectively. So that's basically what impact-based forecasting is. And we do it in a color code where we start with green. Green is no action. So that's, for example, I would use the rainfall again because that's something that we get a lot. So for green, you might get a few light showers, you get those on and off showers, but you don't really need to do anything. You just continue your day as normal. So green, no action, just continue as normal. Then we take it a step up when you see a little bit more rainfall, which could start to maybe affect your day or the possibility of this rainfall being significant. And that's where we go to yellow, which is be aware. So we start to tell you and tailor our messaging saying, okay, just listen out to what we are saying because this may have some impacts on you. After that, we go to orange. And orange is normally linked with our watches and warnings. Sorry, our watches is for orange. And this again is where we expect significant impacts. And significant impacts mean that, say, flooding is possible. So that's kind of like the difference between a watch and a warning. So it is possible, but it's not definite. And some of the impacts that you would get with possible flooding would be things like, with the possibility of flooding, would be things like you might see more water settlements on the road. That doesn't mean there's a flood, but there's water settlements on the road. And then what does that look like? What do you need to do? And that's what we start to talk about. And then we take it to red, which is linked to our warning, and this means take action. This is the time where you have your storm warnings, your flood warnings. This means that something significant is definitely going to impact the island. So that's the basic gist behind impact-based forecasting. I know that is a mouthful, so I can just take a step back, and hopefully we can talk about it a little more later.
So folks, in a nutshell, the Barbados Met Service is using red, yellow, orange, and green to tell you how your day may go, how you should be prepared, whether or not to take action. And as you follow them on their social media or download their app, you are encouraged to pay attention to these colors as they are used in the presentation of your notices so that you are conscious of what could possibly happen. I want to take this opportunity to bring in Mr. Herwood from the DM to tell us how the DM is involved in this warning process with the Barbados Met Service and the other important players.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's take a step back first of all. So the Department of Emergency Management by Act, the Emergency Management Act Cap 160A of 2007 gives us responsibility for managing and coordinating the National Emergency Management System. This system includes several tiers. They include, for example, the Emergency Management Advisory Council and 15 standing committees. And those standing committees have what we call, and there's a reason why going back here, what we call emergency support functions. Some of those functions include sheltering, warning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of agencies within within standing committees that have emergency support functions. We also have the emergency management plan that specifies, on the grid, specifies the Barbados Met Service as the national warning agency for Barbados. Why? DM is not a 24-hour operation. The Met Service says. So Met Service warns for things like, or gives information for things like tropical weather systems and the tsunami hazard. So that's how we work closely with the Met Office, because they provide information to us. And you could put it like the social scientists and the natural scientists. So within impact-based forecasting, the Met Office, as Melka indicated, will say what the weather is going to be, and our job is to turn that into something palatable for the public, for them to understand what the weather will do, and also look at contingencies. So we get deeply involved with a lot of mascot events, cricket, crop rover, a lot of the events that you see happening, we are somewhere involved in the planning for those events. Imagine there is a system on the horizon that Met Office is watching, and we're not paying attention because we are focused on this particular event. And Met Office says, okay, we're going to get 4 inches of rain within the next 4 days. What would that mean for the event? Our job is then to look at that, speak to event coordinators, and look for contingencies that if this thing should happen, what would your contingency be? Where will you move next? What responses you would need to support the event, etc. So the Met Office for us provides the early warning or the initial warning or information for tropical weather system hazards and the tsunami hazard.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did. And I'm glad that you mentioned some of the other...
issues that you manage. So you're not only involved in mitigation and contingency planning for storms and potential tsunamis, but you're also involved in mass crowd management, etc. And I think that that's important because for us as laypersons, we mostly hear from the DEM when there is something hurricane related, but it is to be appreciated that the scope of the work that they provide and the work that they do is very, very broad. As a matter of fact, Mr. Harewood, could you give us some details about the workshops that you do with the district emergency organizations?
Certainly. Again, I want to take a step back before I come forward. So we practice what we call comprehensive disaster management. You know, people see me often and ask, what do you do outside the hurricane season? You don't have any work outside the hurricane season because there's nothing happening. Hurricanes, we see them coming. I always say that's the least of our worries. Don't give me lashes for this, but we see them coming, right? There's the sudden impact hazard that we don't see coming that would really put us in a significant or give us significant challenges. For example, the earthquake, the nearshore tsunami, etc. So we practice comprehensive disaster management, and this is across the region, across the SEDIMA participating states. There are 20 of us. And this looks at mitigation of all hazards, preparedness, response, and early recovery for those hazards. So things like the ashfall, which was never on our radar. We don't have no volcanoes. How we get ash? Never on our radar, but we had to respond to it. So for us, that was, although that was a sudden impact hazard for St. Vincent and Grenadines, but it was a new hazard for us. So things like that we also have to deal with, and how we deal with it, the district emergency organization is our, we used to say eyes and ears, but they're more than eyes and ears now, because in the past, a lot of training would not have gone up to DOs, but DOs are now trained in damage assessment. They train in some aspects of early search and rescue. They train in first aid. They train in operations management. They just finished a shelter management course through the Ministry of Education and United States International Development Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs, etc. So the district organization are the members of the community within the 30 constituencies that provide first line, I use this term loosely, grassroots support to the communities, because we at the DM, we can't be everywhere. So they're an extension of the DM, they're part of the DM, they're volunteer arm of the DM that provides that intervention at the community level. They're responsible as well for our community profiling, so they know exactly who lives, I should say this out loud, who lives where, or should know who lives where, what the hazards are within a community, where the elderly are located, etc. So if you need to evacuate, you know who to go to first, and you know where the shelters are, so where they may be going, if they need transport to move them, etc. So the DOs are the volunteers on the ground that provides all of that first line support to the national system, not only DM, to the national system to support at the community level. So as indicated, some of the training that they would have gone through just this year would have been damage assessment and needs analysis, through a certified course from the SEDIMA Training Center. Some would have just completed a course with the United States Forestry Service International Program in Emergency Operations Center operations. We just also drafted the district organization operations plan for EOC. So the intent is as early as, well, we've already started it, but to establish 5 zones for the DOs and have 5 operation centers for the district organization to allow for them to garner information at the community level and pass the information to the National Operations Center when it's established, when they stood up. And things like first aid training, getting the damage assessment before. So there is a lot of training coming forward, and on next year we are planning to engage in a community resilience program to really look deeper at the community profiling and what communities themselves, outside the district organization, or what the community members themselves need to be aware of to create their own family emergency plans, their business plans, etc. So that at the end of the day, we want to have the communities as the the Nexus for Disaster Management in Barbados. And then that would support, or they would support, the agencies that have direct responsibility at the national level, but we cannot do it without the community level. And I want that to be abundantly clear, that is, the members of this audience, we're all members of a community. In respect of where you sit in government, you live in a community. As the community is impacted, you yourself are impacted. So we all need to pay attention to what happens at the community level.
Okay.
Definitely need to plug here, for those of you who are watching or will be watching on demand later, the importance of the district emergency organizations, and to encourage you to explore how you can contribute, whether it be helping to clear the roads after a major system or having an understanding of first aid, whatever skills you might have. You might be interested in understanding how to operate the radios in the event that we have a system so significant that our traditional communication systems are down. We need as many persons as we can to join these organizations so that they're adequately manned, adequately staffed, and certainly you will be adequately resourced as best as we can to make sure that we can do a whole of country response when or if the time comes. One of the target audiences that we are often keen to join the DEOs is our youth. And I'm very happy that we have on our panel today Ms. Ashley Lashley to give us that youth perspective. Can you, Ashley, perhaps give us your youth definition of climate change and give us an overview of the role that your foundation plays in helping to engage our young people?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The Ashley Lashley Foundation was started in 2019. And firstly, as you guys heard in my bio, my advocacy was centered around non-communicable diseases. And there and then I recognized that health and climate are inextricably linked. And that led me as a passionate young person to partner with UNICEF to develop a global campaign entitled HEY, which stands for Healthy and Environmentally Friendly Youth. And what it does, it looks at the interconnectedness that climate change has on people's physical health, but also their mental health. And it is, as I mentioned, a global campaign. And when I first started it, we had a network of 21 ambassadors in 2021. And we were building their capacity to advocate for the necessary climate and health justice. And from there, building their capacity, partnering with different community organizations, we were able to expand that campaign. And to date, we have a network of over 200 young persons in the Caribbean, Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and North America, who are all coming together to really agitate and advocate for the necessary climate and health justice. What we also did through the foundation is that, as we know, youth and women are one of the most vulnerable groupings to the impact of the climate crisis. And we did a study that looked at the impact of climate change on people's physical and their mental health. And what we've recognized through the foundation in general, but predominantly through the HEY campaign, is that lots of persons don't understand how climate change is impacting on their health and how it goes beyond their physical health into their mental health as well. We're seeing today that there's so much extreme events, weather events, and the intensity of these events in some countries, persons lose their lives, persons are displaced as a result, but also especially for those single mothers of large households and those vulnerable communities, when persons have to migrate as a result of the impact of the climate crisis, especially when persons are the breadwinners of their household, then that has an impact on their mental health as well. So through the HEY campaign, it's relatively to building a community of young persons who can, at a grassroots level within their schools and within their communities and within their homes, really highlight the need for more resilient infrastructure structure to the impact of the climate crisis. But also what we do through HAY is that going way beyond the capacity building is that what we've recognized is that so many young persons have innovative solutions to the impact of the climate crisis. So through our partners, the Clara Lionel Foundation, Open Societies Foundation, and UNICEF, we were able to launch last year the HAY Climate Fund. And for me, recognizing that young persons do have innovative solutions, and it goes way beyond talking to them about climate change, but actually seeing if they have the potential to implement these solutions at a community level. I took the courage to discuss with the partners to develop the HAY Climate Fund, and that looks at reimagining climate finance in an intergenerational context. And when we launched the HAY Climate Fund, it was just an idea that I had. And when we launched it, the topics were climate and health, climate and food security, and climate and gender. We got over 1,400 applications from young persons globally, submitting really impactful projects that can transform lives and transform communities. And 3 of the projects in which the selection communities selected was one from Barbados, aquaponics farm. Then there was a youth group from the Philippines that looked at the indigenous groupings and those remote communities and mothers who as a result of a disaster, may not have access to electricity, so they built like a solar power box. And there was one more, but I can't remember why exactly that project focused on. But through the HAY campaign and through the Ashley Foundation, what we really do is we build the capacity of young persons to advocate for the necessary climate justice. Some of our programs going to the Barbados Youth Climate Action Summit coming home, and even last year in partnership with Spinney, we launched the EcoActive Youth Program. And what that looks at, that goes into the schools here in Barbados, and we talk to the kids about what it means to protect the environment, what it means to maintain and live a healthy lifestyle, and then we get them active in some form of physical activity. And we also looked at reduce, reuse, and recycle, and teaching them about the 3 R's. But when we're in these schools, it's shocking that everyone always has the notion you have to go into the schools to talk to the youth about climate change, and they're not aware about what climate change is, what climate change means. But it was shocking to see that when we go into these schools and we ask kids a simple question, what is the environment? They're able to tell us the environment is everything around me. It's my school, it's my home, it's my family, it's my friends. When we ask them about climate change, they're able to give us a defined answer about what climate change is. So we need to really stop underestimating the intellectual capacity of young persons, and within the school sector, really challenging them to partner with different organizations to create different projects and ideas to help really transform their school sectors, their communities. And that's what we try to do through the Ashley Foundation.
Awesome. You mentioned a lot as it relates to your global impact. You mentioned as well the Barbados Youth Climate Action Project. Can you tell us some more about that so that we can have a stronger appreciation of how you're impacting right here at home?
Yeah, so as a young person, I remember growing up, but also when the idea of the Barbados Youth Climate Action Summit was conceptualized, it was conceptualized based on there was not a forum in which young persons, especially within the school community, could come together to really discuss climate change and its impact on Barbados and our community. And we developed the Barbados Youth Climate Action Summit. It only took place last year, and the themes that we focused on was youth accelerating action, building a climate conscious community, and resilient recovery. And we believe that those 3 topics were very crucial to engaging young persons in a discussion. But when it also comes to youth engagement, it is important to have that intergenerational perspective. So the first year in which we did it, we had an intergenerational panel like today, because I'm the youngest person on this panel. But we had an intergenerational panel discussion focusing on those thematic areas. We had both exhibitions as well. But last year, what was I would say one of the key highlights was that not many school students came out to participate in the first edition of the Barbados Youth Climate Action Summits. The dialogue within the panel discussions that we had were very key and very crucial, but then we went back and we talked about how we can really, like persons today to say that we have to find a way to make agriculture sexy, but how can we find ways in which young people, young Barbadians and children in particular, will be willing to come on board and hear about the discussions. And this year, only last month, we had the second edition of the Barbados Youth Climate Action Summit, and we were able to have over 500 school students really coming out discussing climate change. We had a discussion on women in climate action, really empowering women in climate action in Barbados. We had different breakout groups focusing on renewable energy, climate action, ocean spaces, and so many interconnectedness to the climate and environmental topics. And then we challenged them to come up and present us with the solutions, and they did an incredible job throughout that. And I also walked with some statistics as well here today, because based on the Barbados Youth Climate Action Summit, we did also a youth consultation. And 92% of the youth who participated stated that they ought to be included into the decision-making processes. Oftentimes when decisions are made on environmental issues, youth are often like the checkbox, or we're not consulted initially, and that process needs to change and really have young persons more meaningfully engaged. And they also mentioned that 92% again also stated that climate change and environmental education are not taught enough within our school systems, and 70% of them were aware of the impacts of climate change, the threats, and to our marine fisheries, our agricultural systems, and even their health. And 67 of them indicated that they are privy to policies and initiatives implemented by the government as it pertains to climate action, which lends to reasoning as to why 65% of young people really believe that non-governmental organizations are doing more as it relates to climate and environmental action. But I'm not of the opinion that non-governmental organizations are doing more than the government on climate action. I believe that there needs to be a multifaceted approach when it comes to involving young persons, because oftentimes the information that is communicated to the general public is not translated in a way in which most persons can understand. So there needs to be a heightened level of sensitization and awareness first and foremost to our young people, our children, our public, as it relates to what exactly is being done on environmental and climate-related issues and their role in helping protect their communities and Barbados in general.
Agreed. The youth should not be involved as a token extension of engagement, but they should be at the center as we are certainly creating systems and building a world that they will inherit. One of the areas that really stood out for me when Ashley was presenting just now is the fact that climate has gender implications. It has implications on breadwinners. And so with that in mind, I want to bring in our colleague from the Central Bank of Barbados to give us some insight on what are the economic impacts at the micro and macro level, Mr. Belgrave, of climate change and weather and disasters. We would have had Elsa, we would have had a freak storm, we had ash, as we heard just now. All of these things have dollars and cents impacts. Can you tell us about the views or summarize what the central bank has been observing as it relates to climate?
Well, firstly, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I think when you look at the impact of climate and climate change in Barbados, you have to kind of pick your stories carefully and set up your benchmarks carefully. And for us, a key benchmark would be what happened in the Bahamas in 2019 under Dorian. Now, we had if you look at our economic path over the past couple of years, we had the pandemic shock. Cumulative over 2 years, we lost 14% of GDP. Dorian took out 25% of the Bahamas' GDP. So all of a sudden, you had a country that was reasonably well managed, good levels of foreign exchange, and then all of a sudden, you know, for the next 2 years or so, because you had a situation whereby damages to the hotel plant, etc., things were a little sticky, so to speak. You know, you had your debt ratings were downgraded, etc. So you can see immediately, and the Bahamas is actually a little ahead of us in terms of per capita, in terms of wealth, per capita GDP. But you can see the impact of a storm like Dorian on a country which is medium income, you know, fairly reasonably well off, reasonably good houses. The one disadvantage I think they have over Barbados is they're flatter, so the hurricane impact is greater. But you can see those impacts on a country that is fairly wealthy, a fairly good housing stock. I've visited Bahamas, etc. So I think you have to look carefully at what your story is. There's the short-term story of we being in the hurricane alley, or at the edge of the hurricane alley, fortunately, so we don't get quite the impacts of, say, our unfortunate neighbors like, say, Haiti. And then there's the long-term impacts, where you have most of our wealth-generating plant, hotels, etc., is along that west and south coast. You have the overtime, my colleague is here who is young, the sea level rises. You know, what happens to that plant? So you can see that climate change is going to be quite significant in the years ahead. The other thing you have to look at is in terms of how does it, we are financial regulators, the central bank basically. There's a big push right now to look at the impact of climate and climate shocks on the financial system. So we are working closely with some of our partners, the IMF in particular, to bring that sort of analysis to bear, because you don't want a situation whereby a climate shock effectively destroys your financial system, you know, and causes panic, etc. So I would say that you're looking at a very complex, multifaceted, but extremely dangerous situation in terms of climate change. All the forecasts I have seen coming out of both the economist side as well as the climatologists, etc., point to such things as higher volatility in terms of the weather, in terms of going from droughts to cloudbursts, etc. And that's going to be reflected again in your consumption basket of food. Because one minute, you know, the crops will be doing well, drought, some will die off. Okay, you survive the drought, and then there is flooding. Some more will die off. Prices go up. You probably have to import, hits your foreign exchange. So you can see it impacts you in so many different ways and in so many practical ways that you really are obligated to kind of organize your society to at least mitigate the impacts of climate change. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, but I want you to go into the microeconomic impact a little bit more so that the average person listening can kind of see or understand how the central bank is assessing the impact at their level. I know you talked about the financial system and its vulnerability, but give us some more from the microeconomic perspective.
Well, from the micro perspective, I would really go back to the issue of what we eat, what we consume. I mean, agricultural, our food production sector is probably the most directly vulnerable sector to climate change. Much of our agricultural production is rain-fed. So again, you have a situation whereby you're seeing this increased frequency of swings in the weather, so to speak, this volatility. And the volatility itself is problematic in terms of the planning of crop production. Because all of a sudden, whereby you would expect a certain degree of, say, rain in June, and I have no idea how much that would be, you get a lot less. And what you have planted or you expect to come to fruition for the market isn't realized. So I think for the ordinary man, climate and woman, climate change will be reflected when they go to the supermarket. The short-term climate change, the volatility. They're probably seeing it now in terms of when they go to the supermarket and try to buy tomatoes or something like that, cucumbers. Maybe you can't even find them. That is part of climate change. We even saw it in terms of the production of chicken. Hot weather, basically killing off quite a few of the maturing birds, with the result being that there is obviously moves afoot to try to mitigate the possibility of any shortages coming through in the future. So you are seeing these impacts directly in your pocket already. And I think we have to look at, and I know government has been kind of encouraging persons to go towards greenhouses and such to try to mitigate those impacts. The problem I suspect there may be cost again, the cost of putting a greenhouse, etc. So the farmer has to expend a fairly significant capital cost. The irony is if you put up a greenhouse and you're mitigating against maybe weather, but then a hurricane comes and blows away your greenhouse.
True.
So, as I said, you're very likely to see climate change effects in your pocket in terms of when you go to the supermarket, and that effect is likely to accelerate, so to speak, in the years ahead.
So even though this aspect of the panel discussion isn't specific to climate, as we look at the other side of it, disaster and risk reduction, we would have seen a significant economic impact as a result of the pandemic, as a disaster that affected us, something that we did not necessarily have enough plans in place to deal with at first, and there was a seeming mad scramble to try to put up as many walls as possible, but certainly the economic fallout, especially from tourism, cruise tourism, etc., was significant. What was going through the minds of the central bankers at that time as we watched our main foreign exchange earner just take a massive hit?
Well, we have, I have been around for a little while, so we have seen the 9/11 attacks, etc. So this was, I would say, a similar type experience as we saw the pandemic kind of brewing and getting bigger and bigger in terms of impact. So obviously, I would say the then governor was quite worried. Prime Minister obviously would have been quite worried because, as noted, that's the main foreign exchange earner in particular. I wouldn't say that there was a mad scramble, but you have to kind of, almost every 6 months or so, there is something that is brewing in this world, some new disease that is popping out, and most of them, fortunately, don't reach the point that COVID had reached. But we do have periodic scares that we've been able to keep down so far. And part of it is linked to climate change and what we've done to the ecology of this planet as well, too. So part of it is very much human-induced. So we try to monitor these things very carefully. We spend a hell of a lot of time forecasting, speaking to, not just forecasting with the computer, but also speaking to like tourism partners and evaluating what's going on overseas. So that is part of I would say the constancy of the job that we do.
Indeed. Folks, we are interrogating the topic disaster, risk management, weather and climate, and we have here with us two of our utility representatives. And I want to start with My colleague here on my immediate right, I believe he's from the Barbados Light and Power, Mr. Roger Beckles. Even as we try to manage with these disasters and the impact, and we look at how it impacts the individual, we heard just now that it impacts people in terms of what is available and how expensive it is as it relates to the breadbasket. But there's also that impact as it relates to whether I will be able to turn on my microwave or if I go light the oven, whether I will be able to charge my phone or if I go plug it in the car, and these different things that we rely so heavily on electricity and often take for granted. With the Barbados Light and Power, you have many systems in place, I'm sure, to preempt these disasters, climate, etc. Tell us about the work that you do as it relates to that preparation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to start off by giving you all some facts in terms of how our network is set up. So we have 130,000 customers, of which 18,000 are commercial, and we have about 4,000 kilometers of overhead network cables. That's to distribute the power to the various communities. Of that 4,000, 200 kilometers of that is for transmission. When I talk about transmission, we have 3 power stations, one in the north at Trent, one central west at Spring Garden, and the final one at Sewell. And those power stations, they generate their voltages at 24,000 and 69,000 volts, and we transmit that power either by underground or overhead to 18 substations which are stretched across Barbados. From those substations, we then distribute power at 11,000 volts, and then we step down that voltage to 230 volts and 115 volts for various for the customers. And we have about 77,000 poles out there. We have about 15,000 transformers out there, 30,000 streetlights. So we have quite a bit of hardware that is actually exposed to weather. And when we get weather, severe weather, it impacts us. There's 3 factors that impact us. The wind. High winds cause trees to blow down. And those trees will come down on our power lines or they will come down on our poles. Now, we've been able to mitigate against the trees in that we do a lot of tree trimming. We also do tree clearing, where we just remove whole sets of trees from certain troublesome areas. What we do there, we plant back dwarf trees in those areas. When trees come down on the power lines, we have a special binding or connection on our poles that at a certain stress level, the lines come away from the insulators on the pole, because you don't want the pole to break. Because the time is very time consuming to actually have to erect and plant a pole. So we try to save those poles. With regard to, there's also flying debris with regard to wind. That will also sever our overhead lines as well. The next factor is rain. When there's severe flooding, we have a challenge with being able to access our poles or our hardware out there on the network. There's also the challenge with land slippage, especially in the Scotland district, where you, and say like White Hill, where you have the land slipping and also causing the poles as well to slip. That's one of the challenges. And then recently, in 2021, we would have had the lightning or freak storm. We would have measured over 60,000 lightning strikes on the network. And during that storm, we would have lost just over 20,000 of our customers as a result of lightning. And what the lightning would have done, it would have blown a number of our overhead. On the overhead network, we have a series of fuses, and we would have had to change a significant number of those fuses as a result of that. And I mean, that amount of lightning was, well, we weren't expecting that. That was definitely a surprise on the network. To mitigate that, what we've done is to do a more comprehensive maintenance on our arresters. We do infrared checks on the arresters as a way to predictively determine if an arrestor is about to fail. So at night, we do infrared checks on those arresters, and we also have obviously stocked additional arresters for those kind of emergencies. In the past, since 2016, everybody would have heard about our AMI, our advanced metering infrastructure. Most of you all have one of those meters now at your homes. And what that has allowed us to do now is have real-time visuals of what is happening at customers' homes. Before that, all we could do is distribute power to customers and wait for customers to call us to tell us that the power is off. Now we know based on those AMI meters, so we're able to use the AMI meters for outage management. We're also able to use the network, the communication network that the AMI meters utilize. We're able to use that now to be able to modernize our grid so that we can put more sensors and smart devices on our network so that we know what's going on. You've got the proliferation of a lot of PV, photovoltaic or solar systems on the network, and those AMI meters allow us to be able to see what they're doing at any given time. We've got a high reliance on technology in terms of when it comes to restoration. We would have learned from the experience with Domlec. In 2017, they would have been a Category 4 with Maria, and we would have helped them in their restoration process, where we would have gone up to Dominica, used our drones to do overhead assessments of damage. Now, the terrain in Dominica is very mountainous, unlike here, so we were able to learn how to be able to use those drones to be able to cover wide areas to assess areas, especially the ravines. The way the network is in Dominica, rather than follow along the road with poles, they would use 70 and 80-foot poles to traverse a ravine. Obviously, it's the shortest path. And rather than, so you use drones to actually identify the damage to those areas, as opposed to persons having to walk and go down in those ravines to actually physically do those checks. So what we had learned from Dominica as well was that you need to have your database off-site or off-island. You have all of our information is collected. It's all on a GIS system, geographical information system. We have all those poles, all those transformers, all of those we have on a database. We know exactly where they are because they're all GPS located. And you need to store that information off-island and off-site in the event that we were to get a major or a severe hurricane. We need to be able to access that information because that is how we would be able to build back the network. Dominica didn't have that at the time. So a big delay now was in trying to piece together what was the network, what were the constituents of the network, and therefore what were the parts or the spare parts required to build that network. It took 9 months for Dominica, I think, for the last customer to be connected in Dominica after Maria. So imagine being without power for so long. So what we've done, we've learned from that. Another thing is employees. We would have had ELSA, and employees are required to come to work and try to get the power back on for all the customers, even though you may be leaving your home without power, without water, things like that, but you still need to get your head straight and be able to do what you're supposed to do at work. And we've put systems in place, counseling of employees. We've put systems in place for them to be able to get tarpaulins and generators, simplified means of being able to get finance to get those kind of items. For rations, have emergency rations, have alternative accommodation for the employees so that they will be able to come to work and be able to focus on the restoration effort. So those are some of the things that we've been delving into.
Thank you so much. I have always been impressed with the way how the Light and Power operates. And you shared two things just now that really rang true for me as to why I hold the company in terms of its operations in such high esteem. You talked about cutting down trees, but also replanting trees, which I believe is something you would have started recently.
Yes, we would have started that program about 2 years ago.
Awesome. And then you spoke just now so eloquently about the empathy that was built into your operations to ensure that as people came to work without light, without water, that you not only provided them with the technology and the tools to do their jobs well, but you also took care of them at the individual level to make sure that they could stay in the right mindset to be able to help others.
That is correct. I mean, the employees are customers too. And with ELSA, we would have had over 60,000 complaints or calls coming in the call center. We would have had information coming in from the DEM. We would have had an app out there to collect information. And all that information would have gone into one database. It would have filtered off those that are duplicates. So we were able to have a good idea what the extent of the damage was out there. We would have also sent our own employees out there to do assessments as well too, and all that information comes into one database. So we were able to better manage with ELSA as compared to, say, Tomas, which was in 2010, where we took about 5 weeks to get the last customer on, and we had less customers off. With ELSA, we were able to get the last customer on just inside of 3 weeks, and we had twice as many customers off. We would have worked closely with the DEM, with the BDF in terms of being able to access certain areas, needing road clearing, needed trees to be trimmed and things like that there. So yeah, it's a big collaborative effort, but yes, you need your employees to be able to, they're your bread and butter, you know.
And I'm sure the central bank would be very happy if you could get it under 3 weeks, because that affects our GDP and our attractiveness as a place of doing business. Are you guys using artificial intelligence as well?
Yes, we've dabbled in that. Just recently, we would have had some cybersecurity training in terms of how to maneuver around artificial intelligence, because you don't want to reveal all of your private information in there, because it goes into cyberspace, and you must be careful. So there are only certain persons that will be utilizing that, and we have been starting to utilize it. So
how have you been using it?
What we've been using it is for predictive planning.
Predictive planning, okay.
Yes, in terms of so here in Barbados, we have a number of PV, photovoltaic, solar, yes. Photovoltaics and solar, and we're closely approaching 100 megawatts of solar installation. Now, typically, we have a peak of 160 megawatts on a daily basis, and when you have, although you have 100 megawatts of installed solar, their peak, when we had those very hot, clear days, was 75 megawatts. And what happened to us on those days was it became quite unstable, because solar, the output from a solar plant is intermittent. It varies like this, up and down. And it would have given us problems with frequency, as well as controlling voltage in localized areas.
And if my memory serves me correct, this is where the batteries come in.
This is where the batteries come in. The batteries will be there to fill in those gaps, to smoothen out that output, as well as be able to utilize those batteries at night when there's no solar. You would still need, if you want to go 100% renewables, you would need the batteries to fill that void at night. So that's why there's a big demand now or big emphasis for batteries to be installed. And we're talking about 600 megawatts of batteries to be able to meet that 2030 100% renewables.
One more question for you, and I'm conscious that this is one more than I've asked the others so far, but I'm very curious as to the extreme heat and the impact on the types of data centers that you suggested that Dominica would have been better off to have even off island. Doesn't the heat have a deleterious impact on those data centers?
Yes, it does. Those data centers, just like ours, they generate quite a lot of heat. We would have seen on those hot days as well about a 5 to 10% increase in demand. And obviously that is air conditioning, fridges, freezers, having to work harder because the ambient is no higher. We would have ensured that all personnel would have hydrated. We told them to take more, those persons that work in the field, take more frequent breaks and hydrate as much as possible. But in terms of the plant as well, any plant that produces power, the ambient is key to efficiency. So on those hot days, we would have lost a bit of efficiency, a marginal amount of efficiency because it was so hot. But yes, those data centers do consume a lot of energy for cooling, ours as well too, and we would have seen that increase in demand.
And as a man who likes statistics, I'm sure you know the exact percentage of that marginal change because of the heat.
Oh yes.
But you won't bore us with those numbers, but
No.
at least we know that we have adequate talent at the wheel at the Barbados Light and Power to make sure that all is stable. So
Thanks.
we move from the light now to the water. And there are so many questions that I want to ask that are kind of parallel to what I would have asked the Light and Power as it relates to technology, for example. But let's start with the heat. I know for a fact that Barbados Water Authority recently had a prohibition where you told me not to wash my car and wet my grass and all these different things that I could not do. And many of us in the country watched as other people snuck around trying to break the rule and did our part, I'm sure, many of us even in here, to remind them of the prohibition. But a lot of that is driven not only because of the fact that we are naturally a water scarce country, but climate. So I want you to jump into the discussion here, Mr. Eiffel, and tell us the impact that this extremity in the climate register is having on water in Barbados.
I am very careful in defining climate. Climate is a multi-decadal thing, and people regularly confuse weather with climate. Anyway, but for example, in the last 60 years, we had, looking back at the records of Barbados Water Authority, we had about 61 events that would have impacted our water resources, and that is what you call water resource droughts in the past 60 years. And in the past 10 or 15 years, we had about 12. So it shows that basically, since I look over 6 decades, I could see climate change. There seems to be a signal showing that we are experiencing more droughts. What more droughts do to us? Because yes, you describe Barbados as a water scarce country, and this is one of the things that we hear regularly. People don't seem to believe that Barbados is a water scarce country, and they lambaste us regularly, saying it is not a water scarce country.
Translate lambaste for those from other
But
countries watching
what
us.
I will define is what a water scarce country is. The United Nations has, looking at the amount of water the average person needs per year to do everything. Washing, bathing, cooking, washing your car, watering a lawn, everything. It's about 1,000 cubic meters per year of renewable water resources.
Per individual or per household?
Per person per year, 1,000 cubic meters per year to do everything for those 365 days. Now, your renewable water resources in Barbados is rain. So the first thing you got to do is take out the water that the trees use to keep Barbados so green and pretty. take out the water that when you got extreme flows that run off that we can't catch because we can't catch all. Then you got to take out the water that escapes on the ground to the sea. We need that to escape on the ground to the sea to push the sea back, to keep the sea at bay. When we do all of that, we are left with between 305 to 300, in a normal year, 320 cubic meters per person per year. Less than 1/3 of what the United Nations has defined as water scarce.
1 second. Does that include water that we lose because of how ancient our pipe system is?
Nothing to do with that.
Wow.
Absolutely nothing to do with that. It is your renewable water resources. Now, if you look at another statistic, we call a water poverty index. Barbados is one of the best water resource countries in the world because with a water poverty index, what you do now is look at the cost of water. Please don't add on the sewage charge and so forth. We are garbage tax. We are talking about the cost of water, right? How close water is to the average household. In Barbados, we can't even calculate that because it's in almost every household, right? And the ability to how regular you have that water supply. On average, a person in Barbados, on average, please, I know the God instances, but we deal with the average person that you know don't exist. On average, that is about 2 or 3 times a year that you'll be without water. So when you put all those economic factors together, Barbados has a good water supply system. So on the water poverty, we are good. So that is, and people used to get confused with those things. So let me take the pass on the water poverty side, but yes, we are water scarce. And because we are that water scarce, climate is a significant factor in our water resources. Drought is long onset, long impact. As I tell you, in the past 6 decades, we had about 60 events that impacted our water resources, and a significant part coming in the last decade or 2. Now, how does that affect our water supply? 1, as I tell you, you need that water that escapes on the ground, going to the sea, pushing the salt water out. So therefore, you can have saline intrusion. Our salt water is heavier than the fresh water, so we have a lens of fresh water floating on top of seawater. If you drill almost anywhere below the second high cliff in Barbados, you will butt water, and you will also butt seawater. But the fresh water is on top of that, and we take from that fresh water. Now, what happens when that water coming in is less? It means the salt water intrudes further. Now, with climate change, longer dry periods, you might even get, ironically, you might even get the same amount of rain. But you might have it, remember that flood, the November 30th, the independence floods that we had? That year was a pretty dry year. In 2 days, the amount of rain we had made the annual number look normal. But it wasn't a normal year. So you had droughts. Now, also another part that, and therefore it impacts our supply to our customers. Also another impact is that when we have these droughts, well levels drop significantly. Not only our wells, but the wells used by farmers. And you know what happened? They got a pipe straight at their house. So we will get an increase in demand from the farming community, therefore, again, putting stress on our supply network. Now, that is from the drought side. On the flood side, because people use, the flood is enough water. You got enough water. And people say, That's why the thing lifted. Now, but floods also impact us. Floods, who remember the Karoo flood? In the Karoo flood, people didn't know, we had a major burst main in St. James that the boulders rip out a significant main we had, causing a disruption in supply. So floods impact us that way. Recently, we had, and this is where the Met services, the services they provide, outside the services they provide to the general public, impacts us. Remember when they had the first set of rains the other day, people in St. John and St. Joseph, some parts of St. Joseph, couldn't get any water. Because out there, we have a system, the Bowmanston Caves, which is a unique system. In normal times, when there's not a significant overland flow, the water goes through the normal filtration process, goes through the rock into the Bowmanston Caves, and we pump from the Bowmanston Caves. In times of extreme heavy rainfall, overland flow, there are surface entrances that will get compromised and water will run into Bowmanston Caves, causing siltation, and we have to close it. But when the first one happened, I got a call from Mr. Best, telling me, Alex boy, we got some weather coming. That's the second one. So yes, people suffered disruption and that the water was turned off, but this second time, the water was turned off before there was a significant impact, because the Met services could have told me, look, boy, you expect 3 or 4 inches of rain in the area up there, so basically you know what to do. So it's those kind of services that Met services provide to its client base that is a help to us in situations like those.
So how does the extreme weather and climate change affect your repair schedule?
Basically, now, one of the other things that both the drought and the rain and the heavy rains will cause, and the same scenario that he was talking about just now, that area is very prone to slippage. But in drought times, the soil comes apart and can pull apart our mains. So therefore you get breakage. In the rainfall, King Street and those areas, you get land slippage. That pulls apart our mains. So what we've done in areas like that now is that we're using HDPE. Not that it can't break, but it can have more give. It can withstand that stretching and so forth much better. But yes, it can break. And the drought wouldn't affect our repair schedule in the sense that we can't repair. But if we got a flood, we ain't sending about the fixed mains in a flood, you know, because the trench gonna be full of all kind of nice, pretty water, and therefore it makes it difficult to do your repairs, because if it's a flood, you're constantly pumping, and still like in whole town, the water can't even get to the sea, so there's no way you can pump out enough water to do an effective repair. So in cases of flood, we cannot effectively safely repair mains. And our utility in the ground is also in conjunction with some of his utility in the ground. Electricity and water, particularly in flood, and we just had dig. And that good friends. So therefore, flood significantly impact our ability to do repairs.
I know you're good friends because when my water goes off, my light is usually right behind it, and I want to know why. This is a personal question for me.
I can't answer that.
On a serious note, though, I'm glad you mentioned Whole Town. I believe that with the rising sea level, that must be predicting some challenges for you as it relates to maintenance of your network as well.
Right, particularly on the coast, yes, because we have a history of cast iron pipes, ductile iron pipes, but as you would have noticed recently, we have moved away from those systems, and particularly in the coastal regions where you can have a pretty high water table, that can impact our pipe network. Over time, you will have corrosion of the pipe network. Now, that is why we don't buy only in the special cases. Suppose that we have a high pressure pipe that can only be done in cast iron or ductile iron. That is the only way that we would buy things like that. But we have moved to PVC and HDP, high density polyethylene. These are plastic based, so they're not subject to that level of corrosion. The other impact of sea level rise, as I say, is on the salinity in our wells. So therefore, we have to manage and monitor, and we just start installing a whole series of automatic monitoring stations across the island that will watch the level of our water, will tell me automatically the salinity of the water, and this will link with how we would manage our pumping regimes. So if the sea level is rising, yes, that is a long-term thing, so you would therefore adjust your pumping to suit or spread your wells across a larger area to make sure that you don't pull up seawater. But theoretically, they're saying that if the sea level rise, the whole water table will rise, but you would then still have to move your pump interface up to accommodate for that rise. Because remember, the fresh water is lighter than the seawater. And if the seawater level rise, and if you have the same amount of rainfall, everything will rise. But given the fact that you can have a compressed rainfall season, that will be a challenge.
Very interesting. Repeat the name of the device that you mentioned just now that checks for the salinity of the water.
No, these are automatic groundwater monitoring stations.
Automatic groundwater monitoring stations.
Yeah.
I will try to remember that. There is also technology being used at the Barbados Met Services, and this is part of the reason why they're able to give you such delineated updates or such geographically localized updates. Samelka, tell us about your 3D printing project and give us an update on how that's going.
Okay, so I'll speak on that, but I think listening to all the panelists, I mentioned earlier about sector-specific forecasting. And if I go into that, then I think I could speak also about our observing system, which is where the 3D printing automatic weather stations come in.
Sounds good.
Right, so basically at the BMS, we are monitoring and forecasting for all weather hazards, right? So meteorological hazards. And we're building out our capacity to be able to monitor more and be more detailed with our monitoring. So this is part of where the 3D pause, that's automatic weather stations that we print 3D. So you know about 3D printers. We do 3D printing. We have 3D printers. We have a full, what we call a lab, where we manufacture our own automatic weather stations, which are now stationed across the island. And our goal is to have 100 by March next year. And our network currently is one of the most densely populated automatic weather station networks in the world, just because of how much stations we have on island and the size of our island, right? So that would build out our observing capacity so then we could see where the rain is falling, how much rainfall, the temperatures, even as it relates to the solar aspect. And that's where we start to look at the different sectors and the things that they might want to know as it relates to the weather across the island. In addition to that, as it relates to our observing system, within the last 2 years, we've updated our weather radar so that we would be able to get additional data. Then we've recently started marine observations, and that now takes it to a different realm. So now we're talking about the impacts of the weather and being able to monitor that as it relates to the marine users in Barbados and taking into account those sectors. Then when we take a step from the observing, then we look at capacity building for the forecasting. So yes, when you think forecasting, you just think of myself or some of my colleagues that are here as the human aspect. But in order to get that human aspect of the forecast, there needs to be the technology behind that. And we've been building out models where we can then look at forecasting at a local scale. There are global models which will look large scale, but Leighton Power and Water Authority, even when you start to think about DEM and the central bank, when you're thinking about the impacts on the economy, then you don't just want to know what is going to happen across the Eastern Caribbean or the southern section of the Eastern Caribbean. You want to know what's going to happen in St. Michael versus what's going to happen in St. Lucie, and how that might change, whether it's short-term events. So we upgraded and build capacity in relation to modeling for short-term weather events. We've also done that in relation to climatic modeling, which would be more seasonal events. So then that helps to give the agencies and the sectors within the country a better understanding of the local aspect of things and not just a large scale, because it's very easy to get information regarding weather and climate, climate more so for a global perspective. It's a little hard to get it from a regional perspective, but at a local perspective, that's a whole other story, especially for small island developing states like us. So that's where we are building our capacity so that we can start to give more efficient and detailed localized forecasts. So then the agencies and the sectors within the island can use the information to better plan, because that's really what it is. The sectors need to know how the weather, which is short-term, as Alex mentioned, and the climate, which is long-term, is going to impact on their operations. And it would then trickle down to the general public, because yes, central bank is looking at the economy on a national level, but that has impacts to you personally. So where the Met Office is going with sector-specific forecasting is we are having those conversations and building those relationships. So as I mentioned, Alex spoke about the close relationship we have with Water Authority, and Robert mentioned the close relationship that we have with DEM. We want to have close relationship with different agencies such as tourism and health, and we do have a working relationship with agriculture. But let's take it to that next level so then persons can plan effectively to reduce the risk as it relates to the impacts of weather and climate on Barbados, and in the whole, it would be better for us all as citizens of Barbados. So that is really where the BMS is going with sector-specific products and services, and that's where we want to go. And as we have those conversations, we realize areas where we might need to add additional products and start thinking differently in relation to our capacity building. Because we could sit at our department and be like, yeah, Leighton Power, you need this, and Water Authority, you need that, and the Central Bank, you need something else. But unless we have that conversation, we never know what they fully want. And I think that's maybe something that we weren't quite doing in the past, but we realized that that's something that we need to do because it's for the betterment of the entire country, and that's what we are there for as the Barbados Meteorological Services.
Ms. Lashley, I'm sure your brain is buzzing with ideas for an imminent meeting with the Barbados Met Service on what the youth need Can you tell us what are your thoughts on everything you've heard so far, and going forward, what do we need to do to better engage our youth?
No, thanks for that question, Crystal, because I was here sitting and I was like, oh God, when I think I know everything, it seems that I don't know as much information as I would want. And I'm sure there are many young persons too that don't understand the interconnectedness of the agencies based on today's discussion. And I think that that is an important conversation to continue having, to show that the Barbados Water Authority, the Barbados Light and Power, and so many other agencies that are here today, they do work together at solving a wide variety of climate and weather-related issues that we're facing. So it has been a very informative discussion in which I've learned and will continue to learn, and even understanding more about the economic impact of climate and disaster risk management. And I know that too, the Barbados government is all implemented the Bridgetown initiatives that also looks at that. So what I would say as it relates to young persons, again, is when we are talking about the information, and make it as relatable as possible, because even as my colleague here was talking from the Light and Power, I was talking about when the electricity go. If it's one thing that I hate to know is when the electricity go and I don't have my phone to use. So I make sure that I charge my devices in advance so that I can lay down during a disaster and watch some Netflix on my phone. So I'm sure that's like a lot of other young persons as well, just trying to connect everyday living with disasters that occur so that our everyday situations isn't totally disrupted. So I would just say that the information, one, needs to be a bit more accessible. And when it comes to youth engagement, bringing young persons on your boards, within your discussions, even at a community level and department level, to gauge their feedback, because what I've recognized is that they might already been interested in the topic as well, because even through the Barbados Youth Climate Action Summit, some young persons came up to me, although they call me ma'am, I'm like, I'm still young, you don't need to call me ma'am. They were like, ma'am, the information that I learned today, I was able to put it into my SBAs. So even by connecting to different young persons, it actually has an added benefit to what they can do within the communities. And even what I would say to young persons is that I recognize that we as young people don't know the power behind volunteerism. We are not inclined to volunteer, I would say, as my predecessors would have. So I would say to volunteer and reach out to many organizations and really get involved in the different connectedness of climate and environment, because as we see here today, it's so diverse and it's so interconnected and there's so much to learn. So we just need to use the power of social media, leverage the power of social media and the connectedness of our devices to network with different persons. And there's so many job opportunities that are available within the environmental and climate sector. And if we can highlight that to our young people and show them the jobs that are available, because young people today want to know how I can make money, I need to know how I can survive. So once we could show them that the industry does have significant revenue streams and they have a role to play within the different jobs that are available within the environmental sector, I'm sure that we'll see some much added value and engagement on youth and disaster risk management.
I feel like you've stolen my thunder a bit, because I was gearing up to ask everybody a hard question, and your hard question was going to be, with the fact that young people seem to be more interested in how they can be remunerated, what can we do? So you've given us one solution, which is to highlight some of maybe the entry-level jobs that they can get in the sector. What about our young men? Because I know for a fact that when it comes to volunteering, even in older groups, you find it's mostly females that volunteer. Men usually want to make money. How have you found it engaging young males through your foundation?
I would say, to be honest, young males and males in general are often the ones within this sector. And what I've recognized is that they're the ones that are more passionate about getting involved in certain environmental issues. And within the male sector, I find to tend that a lot of males are interested in the renewable energy, that sort of component. So what I would say, though, is that the males are already engaged in environmental issues, but we now have to encourage young women to also show them that they have a role to play within these sectors. But again, that goes back to educating, and we need to break the stereotypes within these industries to show young women and girls in particular that they have a crucial role to play in the innovation and conceptualization. Because even as the foundation continues to work to build the engagement of youth on climate and environmental issues, most of the persons in which we engage are that of young men within these particular topics. I would say the females are the ones that are ready to hold the microphone and talk about the issues, but the men are the ones, the young males are the ones that are wanting to discuss the solutions that we could implement. So there needs to be a bridge, I would say, between young males and young women to really discuss how best collaboratively both genders can work together on implementing these solutions. Because as we heard today, when it comes to disaster risk management, all hands must be on deck. And it shouldn't go by a gender stereotyping complex, I would say, but more an inclusive component. Even, I would say, young people with disabilities as well. We tend to do a lot of work with the disabled community, and they have a role to play as well, and showing them in times of disasters what mechanisms they have access to and how they can navigate in the face of a disaster, and also have those conversations. So the discussion relating to disaster risk management needs to be inclusive, because at the end of the day, climate change, the weather, it affects each and every one of us despite our varying backgrounds.
Indeed. So I'm guessing very soon, if you haven't already, you'll be meeting with Samelka and the team and talking about, Samelka, you're giving me a look. Let me stop. No. But I'm sure coming out of this series, we have indeed had a diverse panel selection, and based on the updates we've heard today, the Barbados Met Service has been having its one-on-one meetings with key stakeholders, so we look forward to hearing what will be the outcome of a meeting on the needs and the opportunities for our youth as it relates to this issue of climate and disaster risk management and the weather. Continuing with our chronological movement across the panel table today, I move now to Mr. Harewood at the Department of Emergency Management. Earlier, we mentioned that your work does not only include preparing for hurricanes, but there's also tsunami preparation. As a matter of fact, I believe there was an initiative that was completed recently on the South Coast as it relates to tsunami preparation. Can you tell us about that?
Thank you for that question. And, I always have to take a step back. So many of you may not know that the Caribbean region is the second most hazard-prone region in the world.
Second most?
Hazard-prone region in the world. Only second to the Pacific Islands. Barbados sits on a subduction zone, which is a fault. Some people will say we sit on top of it. Some say we sit very close to it. So we're very susceptible to earthquakes. We're susceptible to volcanic eruptions. You know this from 2 years ago. We're susceptible to tsunamis, and we would have tsunami impacts in the past. Not large ones, but we would have had them in the past. So this tells us that we are vulnerable to a lot of things. Almost anything that can go wrong in the region will go wrong. We recently had a study, we were looking at what we need to consider for multi-hazard early warning, and what the region is considering now is extraterrestrial. So we've always had these earth-based type of hazards, What if a satellite crashes out in the sky? What if this happens? What if that? So we're looking at the Earth base, we're looking laterally, but what about, the movie Don't Look Up? Anybody remember that movie? You should watch it.
Repeat the name of the movie.
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up.
So there's also a concern now about things that can come from above. So we say that to say that we all have to understand what our vulnerabilities are. And in doing so, we can then be able to plan better for what the impact could be. So with respect to your question, and you may have to remind me what your question is.
Let me remind myself. Recently, you would have done some tsunami preparedness activities on the South Coast.
Correct. So we would have had, working with the ICG, the Inter-Caribbean Governmental Agency for, forget the name now, so forgive me, a number of tsunami projects. So we have a tsunami evacuation site in St. Lucie, Spikestown, Whole Town, and we've just done our tsunami readiness program on the South Coast. I think the next one is in St. James, the Whole Town area. What this is meant to do is inform persons that, yes, we are susceptible to tsunami, and identify where our tsunami evacuation routes are and where the form-up zones are. So we would have practiced in the Christchurch area. We would have practiced that last year for the Coastal Hazards Awareness Month, and we also support the tsunami, Samelga, help me here with the name, the regional tsunami exercise, Carib Wave, that's correct, Carib Wave exercise. So we are very integral in that process. So the intent for the tsunami evacuation zone, again, is to inform persons of what could possibly happen, to remind us that it is not only the hurricane hazard because we see them coming. We talked about what are the tsunami warning signs, if you see recedes, what to do, etc., etc. If you cast your minds back to 2010, it was the Asian tsunami, 2010, 2011. There was a little girl called Titley Smith. Look up her on the internet. An English girl in Sumatra. She was able to save a number of persons on the beach because she knew from school what the signs of tsunami was. The sea was receding and people running out catch fish and say, look at fish, you can see fish, you can see crabs, you can see this, and people going out. She said, no, something is happening, this is tsunami, I learned this in school. So she was able to take a lot of people up into the inland to avoid the tsunami waves when they start to come in. This is what we want people to understand. What are the signs of tsunami? We can't escape tsunamis. People have been escaping tsunamis all the time. So we can't escape tsunamis. What should we do to escape them? Either evacuate laterally inland up to we're told, the 30-foot contour, or vertically. So a 3-story building might be acceptable, etc. Those are some of the things that we're trying to impress upon the general public. Again, it's just that to remind us that the tropical weather system hazard is not the only thing that can impact upon us. Again, too many of us believe that the only thing we have to worry about in Barbados is the storm or the hurricane.
Where can people find information pertaining to these disasters? So, for example, between yourselves and the Barbados Met Services, if you were, knock on wood, to realize that Barbados is in a tsunami alert stage, how can the average person get this information in a timely manner?
Well, we do have a tsunami alerting protocol, which, as I indicated earlier, the Met Office is responsible for that particular warning. So there are a number of called dark buoys out there, which is tsunami warning buoys, and the information would come from either the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center or the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service, University of West Indies, or the Trinidad and Tobago. That information is passed then by, I think it's by email, WhatsApp, telephone call, etc., to a number of persons in Barbados who have access to that warning system. Once that is done, there's a trigger mechanism and a cascading mechanism that is engaged to inform both the executive and at the same time the general public of Barbados that this is an impact, this is pending, it may be a tsunami information message, and we got one of them just recently. A couple of months ago, there was an impact in Antigua, I think it was, where we actually got a tsunami information message to say that this event had taken place, there could possibly be a tsunami impact, but this is just a message to allow us to sit up and take note that this thing has happened. Or we can get actually tsunami watch or tsunami warning. And that is cascaded throughout the system. I am not able to tell you right now exactly how or who gets it first, but it is meant to inform all and sundry at a very short stage of what the impact could be. Of course, the challenge that we always have is the ability to inform the public. So we've just signed, I think, about 9 MOUs with radio stations across Barbados to be able to do what we call emergency broadcasting, which is critical because most of us, a lot of young people too, don't listen to radio, don't watch television, don't do what? Don't do a lot of things that the older generation may do. So how do you get the message out to everyone at the same time? We also depend, this is where we depend on our volunteers, on our community-based systems to inform a person because you may be sleeping when something happens. And again, we're not a 24-hour operation. You may call us and call someone and you may not be able to get through the first time. So how do we provide that message to as many people as possible in the shortest possible time? And this is where we segue in now to a multi-hazard early warning system, which is a project that the Caribbean has just, we've been doing it for a little bit, well, we've been planning for it for a little bit. We do have a multi-hazard early warning system policy that has just passed the Emergency Management Advisory Council and is meant to go to Cabinet. We did what we call, we did an assessment of our emergency program and what it needs to include, like, for example, messaging, et cetera, et cetera. We've also engaged with the UN system, what they call the Early Warning for All initiative. That came about just last year. And it was launched in Barbados, I think in November in Barbados last year. The head of the UNDRR, United Nations Office for Disaster Reduction, actually came to Barbados to launch that. So just last month, we had another stakeholders meeting looking at the gap analysis that we did to look at what the challenges were with multi-hazard early warning systems and to come up with the partners from UNDRR an implementation plan. So we're working also with the implementation plan. Notwithstanding that, there's still some things that we need to be aware of at present because that implementation plan is really going to tell us what we need to do, and most of the time we're already doing it. So for me, it is really for persons to understand what our vulnerabilities are. We talk about climate change, and what is climate change? In my business, we talk about climate change adaptation. So what is that adaptation? We know that we really can't do in this forum here anything about the climate changing. We know what the climate change is bringing towards us: sea level rise, droughts, more stronger storms and hurricanes, etc. So what? So what? That means then that we need to then make sure that we build properly, we build better. We have to protect our reefs. So we need to look at things like coastline protection, not building close to the high water mark, not building in floodplain. And if you're in floodplain areas, knowing what your contingencies are with respect to mitigation of flooding, all these types of things for adaptation to the climate crisis. Because at this stage, we can't revert it, but a lot of things we can do to help us manage it, right?
Can you take another step back? I want to do this dance with you. Can you take another step back? I know you've taken a number this evening, and just explain the early warnings for all system that you mentioned, that initiative just now.
Okay, so that is, I think it's 2030, if I'm not mistaken. The United Nations has indicated that all persons in the world should have access to early warning systems. The date may be a little off. And the Caribbean has taken the initiative to push it forward quickly. So our intent is so it's basically the same thing as our multi-hazard early warning system. but this is the UN's, the global name for it, if I could say that. So our intent is working with our partners, ensure that the public will have access to information as quickly as possible through all the modes of communication out there, and that they're also involved in providing information. So like, for example, where we have gullies and water courses with the estuaries going out to the sea, etc., where you know it'll be flooding, etc., to put in things like flood gauges. So you know when the water is rising, you hear a buzz or something, buzzing on a cell phone or something, so you know, okay, there's something happening there. And they're able to communicate that to the services, to the DOs, and then to us or to the Met Office or to whomever, that information could then be reviewed and put out there. So, you know, even apart from putting out there, then you know within your community what actions you need to take if you hear that buzzer going off, for example, that the water levels are rising. So that's one of the things with respect to early warning systems. As the Met Office indicated, they have a number of measuring systems out there, which also impacts or allows us to understand what is happening at the local level. Remember when it was small, you only heard about rain in two areas.
The airport.
The airport and somewhere else. Now we can get that type of information from a number of places. So it's trying to allow us to take charge of our realities, take charge of ourselves, be able to know something is happening, what should we do next? And this now, again, you know, I like my segues into what the community needs to be there looking at your own community disaster plan, personal plan, all these types of contingency plans. So, for example, if you live in a cul-de-sac that floods, then we know if it's going to flood, I need sandbags. You can't wait till after the flooding to get sandbags, right? And you can't take sand off the beach in Barbados. So, know quickly, early up, where your sandbags coming from and what you put in the sandbags. There are some gel sacks that are sold as well. I don't know if we sell them in Barbados, but we do have access to some of them, not many, that persons can use. But with a gel sack, it has to be submerged in water before it inflates. So that's a problem. So you need to be able to identify, if my house is going to flood, how am I going to mitigate flooding into my house? What do I need? If you know that my roof is not going to withstand torrential rainfall, I need tarpaulin, then you need it before the event and not after, because after your house already wet. So you're not solving the problem. You're bandaging the issue. So it allows us in general, to identify all the things that we need to do up front and start to put those contingencies in place to treat them. Have we answered the question?
Yes, thank you so much. And given so much more.
Sorry?
And I have so many questions, but we only have so much time, and we are actually out of time, but I do need to give our representative from the Central Bank of Barbados his next round of questions. We've heard about all the technology that's being used. We've heard about the work that the good people in these various disaster management agencies and adjunct agencies are doing. We've talked about the mitigation plans, but when all is said and done, even at the household level, you can't do anything without money. And Mr. Harewood would have introduced the Bridgetown initiative to the discussion just now. But I do know that Barbados is also engaged in debt for climate swaps as well to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Can you break all of this down for us, Mr. Belgrave, so that the man on the street can understand why is the Prime Minister still talking about the Bridgetown initiative and traveling so much and trying to find all this money internationally? Why does this matter to me as the man on the street to get all this climate money that we keep hearing about?
Well, I'll speak to the debt for climate swaps. I'll leave the other bits for somebody else. Thank you. In terms of the debt for climate swaps, what we have been trying to do as a country, basically, is that you take some of your existing debt that you have up there. Typically, I think the rate was like 6.5% or so, and you partner with a kind of international nature-based grouping. Our group was the Nature Conservancy. And what happens with a bit of financial maneuvering is that you end up, what you give up is you agree to have a particular area of your coastline that you're going to protect for future generations. And in exchange, your debt service comes down. So you swap out the debt for a lower cost debt. The cost, if you can call it a cost, because clearly you're going to benefit if you manage your resources. So it's basically an incentive for you to manage your natural resources, your environment better than you would in the past. So you're effectively committing to protecting certain areas in exchange for getting something of an ease on your debt. So it is financially beneficial to you and is beneficial to future generations of Barbadians because they would have the benefit then of that protected area, and this current generation would exploit it for our own particular benefit. So that is basically what how these swaps work. Belize did one, I believe they did one as well, and there are a couple of other ones that people are trying to develop throughout the world. So it's quite an innovative way of kind of dealing with climate and environmental management at the same time while managing down your debt.
So help me to understand. If I have money that I borrowed from the IDB, as an example, at 4%, and I do a debt for climate swap, is there a second lending agency that's buying my debt from IDB and lending it back to me at a lower rate? I'm trying to understand.
You're swapping out the debt. Basically, there's debt out there, say, in the market. The agency would buy out the higher cost debt, and you would effectively swap that debt for lower cost debt in exchange for your commitment to protect a rainforest or a coastal area or something. So you're basically, the debt that is bought back is commercial debt that is out there, is our commercial debt that we would have restructured in 2019. So you're buying that back, the partner entity is basically buying that, swapping it out, and you're committing to doing something beneficial for yourself in the long term effectively, but for the environment as well. So that's how they work.
So this has beneficial impacts for future generations then?
Well, I would say it probably has beneficial impacts for all generations, but it prevents this generation, my generation, from maybe over-exploiting a particular area. So it would, in a sense, it incentivizes you to manage your natural environment better. It actually saves you quite a bit of money. I don't recall the exact cost, but it was quite a couple of 25, 100. I can't remember the exact cost, but it was a significant sum of money, millions that you were saving. So that incentivizes you to kind of take the correct path in terms of environmental preservation.
So it creates fiscal space then?
Very much so.
Okay. I believe I understand. I hope that those listening understand the notion, the concept. Did you opt not to respond to the question about the other initiative, the Bridgetown initiative?
But the Bridgetown initiative is a little more nascent, as still something that is developing. So I don't feel kind of qualified to really. I know the purpose of it in terms of climate justice and such forth, but I wouldn't delve into it yet because it's not kind of fully. It's not fully complete, so to speak. But the general parameters are there. You are looking at a significant increase in climate adaptation funding provided by the countries that would have generated most of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's a big part of it.
Okay, so let me ask a more general question then. The Bridgetown Initiative, from what I understand, it speaks to this whole notion of, as you said, justice. We are in an age where we talk about diversity, equity, inclusivity, and accessibility, DEIA, and so on. For the central bank, I would imagine that traditionally you've taken a more traditional view of your planning where you look more at the economic impact. But based on this campaign and all that we're hearing and seeing online, there's a call for even entities like yours to not only look at the dollars and cents impact, but the social impacts. Would you say that the Central Bank of Barbados is making a shift in that direction to be more conscious not only of, or maybe you've always been that way, more conscious of not just the dollars and cents impact of what you are required to do, but the social and justice and equity impacts as well?
Well, we've always looked at the broad impacts. It's kind of a myth that we just look at the dollars and cents. All economies effectively are trade-offs between individuals, governments, businesses, etc. In Barbados, you've had the social partnership working for years. Again, trade-offs. So we've always looked at that. Greening has become, and climate has become more important. I mentioned impacts we're the regulator for a big set of the financial system. So you have to look at these things to a large extent. You have to look at the equity of access to bank accounts, for example. That's something that we do look at. And our newest governor certainly has pushed that in terms of ensuring that there is at least one account out there that everybody can access without fees. And you look at financial deepening, ensuring that trying to bring innovative solutions in terms of the electronic means of accessing your money, basically. There's a lot of discussion about that in terms of using these techniques, and it's certainly very strong in like South America. They're using these techniques to kind of broaden access to finance and broaden access to financial products to groups that have traditionally been shunned by the formal financial system, right? Because the credit risk is higher, etc. So you do have to look at these things. These things are kind of metrics you look at and try to develop and improve on over time. So I would just defend the bank here a bit and say that, we do look at these things all the time.
Fantastic. We have heard about an agency called the CCRIFF. Does the central bank work closely with them, and what exactly, I'm guessing that R is for risk, which you just started to touch on, so maybe you can build on your risk points in your answer. The CCRIFF.
Well, the central bank wouldn't really work directly with the CRIF, what we normally call CRIF, but certainly the government of Barbados would. We are actually, I think we are the country that has accessed CRIF the most since its formation. I think is at least 8 times. Certainly the Minister Strong was talking about accessing CRIF for a recent rainfall burst that we had. We aren't the largest borrower, we aren't the largest recipient, because CRIF is basically an insurance, is what they call a parametric insurance. Parametrics in the sense that it's not a traditional type insurer whereby a disaster hits you, your roof gets blown off, the insurance adjuster comes out and you basically says you can get X, Y, Z. Parametric is you can get a lot faster service or a lot faster receipt of funds because there's a pre-agreed formula when a weather system hits a certain threshold you get a payout of X. So it's a faster distribution of your money. It is something that is actually unique to the Caribbean. I think is the only one that we have this multi-country parametric insurance pool. And it has worked pretty well. I mean, Haiti has been a massive recipient of parametric insurance when they had the earthquake that destroyed most of the housing. So it's something that I hope will continue to be supported by our governments, because quite frankly, you know, we do live in a very disaster-prone area, and while we're fortunate to be kind of on the edge of it, I think it's a very valuable organization to be part of.
And a pioneering one based on what you're saying.
Yes.
All right, so since we had a larger panel, I am guessing I have a little bit of leverage to ask another round of questions before we ask for closing comments, because I do have a number of questions that I want to ask. Samalka, give me a wink or something. All right, I'm going to take liberty. As it relates to the Barbados Light and Power, certainly one of the very topical issues is this one of renewable energy, and we've heard about justice and the fact that Barbados has mandated that every household should have the ability to put some panels on their roof. That's justice. So it's not only certain people, as we were saying, Beijing parlance, it's any household.
Anybody.
But you would have educated us earlier to the fact that once you start doing that, there's certain volatility that is introduced.
Correct.
Can you go into some more detail as it relates to that, and how we can look forward to insulating ourselves from climate change through renewable energy?
Right. So what I would have said earlier would have been that as we head towards 100% renewables for 2030, we're at the stage now where we need to have not just solar and wind and intermittent renewables on the grid, but we need the batteries as well. So what would have happened over the last 5 years or so? You would have had a large influx of solar. And yes, it was good, and it was in the early stages. So in those days, the ratio of our fossil fuel-based plant versus solar would have been, the ratios would have been small, and therefore the impacts of solar would have been very marginal. What we're seeing on a daily basis, as I alluded to earlier, would have been changes in frequency. So we're supposed to provide 50 hertz frequency, as well as a voltage, a stable voltage, typically for homes of 115 volts or 230 volts AC. What we found is with the higher proliferation of solar, the frequency the frequency fluctuates. You all wouldn't see it because it fluctuates in milliseconds. We've also seen voltages also fluctuating. We're supposed to provide a plus or minus 6% margin on voltage. If you get excessive voltage, it tends to damage equipment. If you get under voltage, your equipment tends to not want to work. And what we're trying to do is mitigate. So we've told the government, we would have advised them that once we reach 100 megawatts of distributed solar, and when they talk about distributed solar, that is anybody out there with a solar or renewable plant. Once that threshold is reached at 100 megawatts, that is the point where we're saying, whoa, it's too much for us to be able to handle. What's happening though is to allow for the further penetration of renewables. We are working alongside with the government and with some other stakeholders in terms of the battery storage aspect, and trying to get to fast track battery storage installation in the island over the next 18 to 24 months, so that the solar penetration can continue. And that's the way we're trying to obviously to reach that 2030 target.
Would you say we're still on target?
The target has always been a challenging one, and we need a challenge. So for me, personally, I would say that it is a robust target, and if we were given a softer target, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So yes, 2030 is where we're aiming for, and that's what we're trying to achieve from Light and Power's perspective.
Yes, indeed. An aspirational target is always better than a soft target, as
Correct.
you rightfully said. So the Barbados Water Authority, water harvesting. What can the average man do so that we can capture more of this runoff water? Because we don't expect the entire responsibility is on you, but we want to play our part. Tell us how we can play our part in terms of water harvesting.
The water harvesting, actually recently what has happened is that you had the dual plumbing system being passed. So now the same rainwater you're harvesting on your house, which is actually law for newer houses, and because it applies to newer houses, don't mean that you at your house, although it might not be in your house, you can install rainwater harvesting. And one, you can use it for gardening. With dual plumbing system, you can use it for flushing your toilets. The toilet is about 75% of the water that you use in your house. The toilet and the shower. Because we like to bathe long, and you go to the toilet regular, and everything you go to the toilet, you flush. Also, what you could also do that will save some of the rainwater you stored and save some of the rainwater, some of the pipe water coming to your house is just take one of these bottles, fill it with water, and place it in your cistern. A very easy thing. Each time you flush that toilet, you save this amount of water because this water can't get over there. So if you put this in your cistern full, each time, remember you got to fill it because if it's empty, there's air it can float. So you fill it with water, and each time you flush the toilet, you are saving that amount of water, right? Also, sometimes people have the rainwater systems. They don't know what to do with the water besides washing the car. They might not have enough area to plant a significant garden. Well, then, if you get a small well, run it back in the ground. So that instead of going off the hard surface, you got a hole and run it into the ground. That is significant recharge into the aquifer. So therefore, now you just use a direct conduit there into the aquifer, and you can dig it a certain amount of feet, so it can filter through the rock and go back into the aquifer. All that will act as recharge to the aquifer. Even if you're far away from a water source and you're close to the coast, it will still recharge the aquifer in keeping the salt water interface at bay. So things like that. Dual plumbing, using it for flushing your toilets, use it for watering your garden if you have a garden, use it for washing your car, and return it to the aquifer. So those are the options that you have. Now, in the Northern Caribbean, a lot of people use roof water catchment systems for potable water, right? But if you're going, by law we don't advise that here. But basically, if you're going to use it inside your house, all you need is a leaf trap, a first flush system, because you can get leaves and they fall on your roof sometimes. That you don't get blocked, because you don't want the gutters to be blocked, because if the gutters block and water settle, dengue, chikungunya, and you don't want that either. So therefore, you want your roof catchment systems to be free of that blockage. Their tank is properly covered to stop mosquitoes getting in the tank. But in that case, the overflow from your even the overflow from your tank, because you'd be surprised how quick a 1,000-gallon or 2,000-gallon tank just get filled in the rains we had the other day. So your overflow now can still go in the ground. So therefore, you're still recharging. And you have the tank there to flush your toilets and so forth. And the dual plumbing system will tell you how it should plumb, the number of non-return valves it should go, the color, the pipe, things like that. No, you don't have to bore through replumb your house. You can do it on the outside walls and link to those areas, so it isn't as expensive. But a publication will be coming from a combination between Barbados Water Authority and the Environmental Protection Department in collusion with the Ministry of Health to further educate the public on these issues.
That was going to be my next question. So thank you so much for letting us know that we'll get more information and perhaps more bite-sized data.
No, we do a lot of training. You see the lady over there? That fleshy looking there? So, it's good to hear that the schools are talking back about water conservation, about environment and climate change, because we at the Barbados Water Authority does a lot of that training in the schools, from primary school straight back to community college.
Fantastic. Folks, we are opening the floor now to your questions. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hi, good evening. I'm Cecilia Neblick-Brathwaite. I'm a behavior change specialist. I want to applaud the Met Office for this program this evening. It was very informative. I'm happy that you're heightening your sensitization across Barbados, utilizing different mediums and different sectors and different disciplines, because sometimes we think that, we are focusing on one discipline alone, but sometimes the information transcends to other areas as well. When I heard Ms. Jackman on Friday speaking about the levels of, let me see, she was looking at the levels with respect to when you have say flooding or a disaster. And I realized that this was the levels that I use for my behavior change model. So something like that we can work on to see how best we can use your information to plug into our model to see how best we can get a quicker or better response in areas, for example, the behavior change model looked at pre-contemplation, and that was green, be aware. And the contemplation model for my model looked at yellow, which was be aware. And these are things that we work with at different levels of the behavior change model. So for example, if you have flood or if you have a hurricane, you can target your messaging to get a quicker response, to get a better response at every level of your process. So I just want to say that sometimes you can probably speak to another discipline. For example, we do research as well. We look at social work and climate change. And these were the issues that I was researching at the university to see how best we can merge these disciplines, because we recognize that the social sector play a vital role in all the disciplines. For example, the youth, Ms. Lashley, I am so proud you are amazing. And I work with the Light and Power. I totally enjoyed working with the Light and Power. I also spoke to Captain Robert Haywood before, because we did a program on the people's business where we looked at gender, because we're looking at resilience, and you cannot target males the way you target females. So although it may seem, just put the thing over the radio, there's a lot that we can learn about messaging with respect to gender and resilience and recovery, and the time we spend at recovery. These are all issues. For example, in the central bank, we're looking at programming, budgeting, and all these are different areas that can be tied together. And you're looking at the 3D process, whereby you're looking at placing them in different parts of the island, and you recognize that varying levels, social levels, require different messaging strategies and different information. We have certain gaps that we need to plug to make sure that this is a holistic approach when we're looking at climate change and climate resilience. So anytime you need any assistance in that area, I am happy to give that assistance so that we can create a better Barbados for all, so that we can reduce the levels of probably disasters that would happen in case we have an event. One quick example, I recognize that the Ministry of People and Empowerment and Elder Affairs and Mr. Safri will speak to things like asking persons in the community to let them know if they're willing to rent or lease their housing for persons to utilize. But you have to be careful, because if you rent a house and that house is not secure structurally, then the persons from the lower echelons then would have a greater disaster, because you would have leased the house, because now it's crunch time and persons are not renting the houses as often as they would. So you're going to get everybody coming up and anybody saying, okay, have a house, so let me rent it to you, but the house may not be structurally sound. So you also have to forecast and look at these things in preparation. So these are all social issues that are underlying that we need to look at to make sure that when we are creating our programs, we are looking at geographical mapping from a technological point of view and for social point of view. Although the DEM and the persons in the community know these areas, they also have so many different things that we can look at to make this whole effort better for the next year. So these are things that I want to say thank you to, and like Ms. Lachey learned a lot, and I want to applaud the Permanent Secretary and Mr. Murray and all Ms. Jackman and all the other persons that came out this evening, these people in the offices, to make this a real interesting. Like Ms. Lachey learned a lot today. I learned a lot. And I am back at university because I was the president of the alumni, so that's why I thought it was important to look at these issues when we had our COVID, when we were on Zoom. So we had a lot of regional things, and I recognize with the University of Mona, they have a board set up at Mona campus to discuss these issues. So I was discussing issues at Mona campus, and not in Barbados, about disaster management and HIV and these issues. So we need to, for example, I'm on the university's library board as well. So this is things that I need to go back, because we have a whole display in front of the university, and we can have some displays from the Met office there, so that come time, hurricane time, we can have the library all displayed so that the students can learn, be prepared, and be ready. So these are all small little things that we can do, triangulate our models and our methods to see how we can come together to assist you doing some wonderful work. So thanks for allowing me, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that interlude. Certainly, the intersectionalities are endless, and we are grateful that you raised a few of them just now, including research. Would anyone on the panel like to respond? All right, so are there any other questions? There being no other questions, Mr. Speaker, we have some questions for you to win some prizes today. And I'll try to go through them quickly. The first question: what are the colors that the Met Office uses for its impact-based forecasting? And what do each of the colors mean? You can go to the microphone. Once again, what colors does the Met Office use for its impact-based forecasting, and what do each of the colors mean?
I have green, light showers, yellow, be aware, orange, impact, red, danger, action.
Samelka, can we give it to her?
I think somebody else has an answer, so you see if it's a little closer.
So I have green.
Hold on 1 second.
Sorry. Green, no action. Yellow, be aware. Orange, watches, significant impact. And red, warnings, take action.
Yeah.
Very good. Can we have your name? Someone from the team take her name?
Nadia Sukram.
Nadia Sukram. Nadia is our first winner. Second question. Give two of the major impacts of climate change mentioned in the discussion. That's an easy one. Once again, give 2 of the major impacts of climate change mentioned in the discussion. Not 10, just 2. For each of these questions, there are prizes.
Good night.
Good night.
Lots of heat, lack of water.
Sounds good. Can we get your name?
Sorry. Kathy Harris, St. Michael West, DEO.
Kathy Harris. Question 3. Where can you access weather alerts issued by the Barbados Met Service? Once again, where can you access weather alerts issued by the Barbados Met Service?
Hello, good night. Through the Common Alerting Protocol, the CAP?
Yes.
Okay.
What's your name?
Caroline Blenman. Caroline Blenman.
Caroline
Blenman.
Blenman.
Yeah.
Okay, congratulations to you. You are our 3rd winner. Question 4 of 7. Name 3 of the hazards discussed at some of the panel discussions, so not necessarily tonight, but you've been following us, and we want you to name 3 of the hazards that were discussed. I believe we named a few of them this evening. Y'all don't know what in these prizes? It could be money. It could be a ham. No takers?
Hi again. So I would say the meteorological hazards, the seismic hazards, as well as societal hazards, as you mentioned, population displacement, and instances of violence and crime.
Sorry, please repeat.
Sorry. So the meteorological hazards, right? Then you have the seismic hazards, which you was mentioning with the tsunamis, and then societal hazards like crime, violence, any displacement that would occur through localized or national.
So meteorological hazards,
the
seismic hazards, and
societal, yeah.
And social.
Societal.
Societal.
Social, yeah. Hazards.
Hazards.
Yeah.
You take it? Okay, congrats. That's 2 hams for you. Not for you. I have no idea what's in the prizes, but I'm sure they're good. Our 5th question. The Barbados Meteorological Services, BMS, and the Department of Emergency Management, DEM, collaborated to host a series of panel discussions, with this one being the final one. How many panel discussions were held in total?
I don't know. I thought it was 4, but I don't know.
How many of these panel discussions, of which this is the final, did the BMS and the DEM partner to host? I'll give you 2 guesses. Whoever can see microphone. But if the first one is right, then you don't need the second one.
4.
There were 4? Try again.
6.
Correct. Question 6 of 7. Give 3 of the agencies that the Barbados Meteorological Services has partnered with on previous panel discussions. That's a hard one. 3 agencies. To repeat, name 3 agencies that the Barbados Meteorological Services partnered with in hosting these panel discussions.
Previous.
You're asking me to give you a hint? Are you on phone a friend? You can't use the ones from today, that's cheating. That's like literally coming out here and reading, no.
I remember there was one at Hawthorne with Coastal Zone.
Coastal Zone Management Unit, yes, that's one.
Alex? Tourism?
Who?
I just remember the one at Hawthorne.
You said something just now.
Right. That was Coastal Zone, tourism.
Tourism, which agency? Do you remember?
I can't remember exactly. Probably, yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Which one?
BHT.
BHTA, that's 2. One more.
You could take me too.
You would take the 2?
Thank you.
Okay. The third one could have been the Barbados Agricultural Society. Final question. Everybody should know this, but don't all fight to go to the microphone. When is the wet season in Barbados?
It changed. It changed.
Due to climate.
No, it didn't change because of climate change. At least not yet officially. Anyone want to guess?
June to November.
Correct.
June 1st. Yep.
All right, so I believe we have all the names of the winners and how many times they won. No worry about fighting over the ham this evening. What's the name of the?
Coinman. Oh, nice. Handy stuff.
For those of you who didn't participate, you'll be sorry to hear now that the prizes were donated by none other than Koiman. Yes.
Ooh, nice.
So they're going to be nice. And we thank Koiman so much for their donation. Folks, we have come to the end of our session today. And in all things and always, we should give thanks. And we're very happy to have the chairperson of the St. Michael Northwest DO, Ms. Doriel Gill Skinner, to deliver this evening's vote of thanks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you heard, I am Doriel Gill Skinner. It is my pleasure, on behalf of the Department of Emergency Management Volunteer Arm, the District Emergency Organization, to say thank you to this evening's esteemed panel for your robust discussion. It is often said that you are never too old to learn something new, and this evening was no different. Thank you to Mrs. Jackman, Captain Harewood, Ms. Lashley, Mr. Belgrave, Mr. Beckles, and Mr. Eiffel. Did I say Ms. Beckles? Okay, sorry. Thanks are also extended to our permanent secretary. Thank you, ma'am. Special thanks to Ms. Crystal Austin for keeping the discussion flowing this evening and at all of the previous discussions. I also say thank you to the Barbados Met Services for your foresight and for engaging our district emergency organization and our communities over the last 6 months on various topics of interest, starting in the north, in St. Peter, then traveling south to St. Philip, Christchurch, St. James, St. George, and finally this evening in St. Michael. We thank you for the wealth of information which was shared before our communities. The series of panel discussions which spoke to topics such as hurricane preparedness, excessive rainfall, high winds, coastal and health hazards related to extreme heat, which were also timely given what was happening across the island in those particular points in time. Finally, a big thank you to the general public who made up the numbers of various audiences who attended either in person or online. Without you, your participation to the panel discussion would have not been a success. Again, I extend thanks to you. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gill Skinner, for that very well said vote of thanks. Folks, on behalf of the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information, the Barbados Meteorological Services, the Department of Emergency Management, the Department of Public Affairs, and our crew, we thank you so much for helping us to bring down the curtain on what was a very edifying panel discussion series. We trust that you would have taken all of the advice, the suggestions, and the information and made good use of it to navigate all of the weather that we have been experiencing this year. We are just about at the end of the current wet season, and we encourage you to continue to be prepared, continue to volunteer so that we can quickly recover. Follow the agencies on their various social media channels, their various apps, to make sure that you continue to remain up to date on the latest developments. As I always like to say, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Thank you so much. Travel safely.